Hi everyone, and welcome to the last video in my coverage of the Weekend Z tournament of 2013. As I informed you in the last video, Magnus Carlsen has scored an amazing overall tournament victory with 10 out of 13, equalizing Kasparov's record in the process. The candidates tournament, which will decide who plays Anand for the world title, is only 6 weeks away, and it's sure to create a lot of excitement in the chess world. Needless to say, I will be following it avidly and analyzing the games here. Okay, so to get on with today's game anyway, this was taken from round 12 of the tournament, where Carlsen played Hikaru Nakamura, the US champion and #1 of that country. Nakamura has never beaten Carlsen at standard time controls, so it was a good test of his nerve and resolve to see how he approached this game. Carlsen had white and opened with e4, to which Naka responded c5, throwing down the gauntlet right away with the Sicilian defense. He obviously was not in a mood for half measures. Carlsen continued with the main line knight f3, and then came knight c6, which is the main alternative to playing d6. Carlsen continued with the main line d4. One of the reasons why is because black is threatening to play e5, creating a bind on this d4 square and the d4 push, and it restricts white a little bit. So after c takes d4, knight takes d4, all normal, Carlsen went for the Kalashnikov variation with an immediate e5, and this is a sharp line. Black gains a tempo on the knight immediately, but makes positional weaknesses on the d file at d6 and d5, which white can aim to exploit later. The best move here is knight b5, which Carlsen played, is threatening knight d6 check, picking up a strong piece in the dark squared bishop. This bishop on c1 will become very strong in resultant structures. Black allows this in the Lowenthal variation, which is an old line that has since been virtually refuted, although some people still play it. However, it's never been seen at top level, and the usual move is d6, simply, in order to prevent knight d6. And this creates another weakness for white to attack in the d6 pawn, which is backward on an open file. Carlsen now elected for something of a sideline in g3. Normal is playing the knight on the first rank to c3, aiming immediately to occupy the d5 square. Carlsen's move g3 aims, of course, to fianchetto the bishop, thus further binding the d5 square and the d5 push from black, which he'd like to play, as in many lines of the Sicilian, in order to equalize. Nakamura responded with h5, aiming to shake up the white king side. In the interview after the game, Carlsen considered this move more original than good, which is a democratic way of saying that he didn't think much of it. Naka is a very strong blitz player and superb tactician, having outsmarted even the world champion Anand. Thus he is no stranger to these interesting, although perhaps dubious lines. It's the kind of move that's praised if it's successful and criticized if it fails. Carlsen continued now with knight 1c3, aiming, as I said, for d5, which white now has total control. Naka kicked the b5 knight with a6. He waits for this move knight c3 first, so the knight on b5 has to go to a more passive square, knight a3, and now b5, threatening to fork the knights, which is a common theme in the Sveshnikov and Kalashnikov lines. Of course, the correct move is now knight d5, occupying the outpost on move 9. One of the points of playing the Kalashnikov instead of the Sveshnikov is that, having omitted knight f6, which is the Sveshnikov, black can now play knight g e7 in order to challenge the knight, and if it had been on f6, then bishop g5 is something of a problem. So black can exchange off this powerful knight much more easily this way. Carlsen doesn't mind seeing it traded, though, correctly concluding that he will stand better should black trade. Instead he went for bishop g2, just cementing control of d5 and ensuring his king has a safe haven, unconcerned with the imminent pushing of the h-pawn. So Nakamura played bishop g4, and another reason behind this early h5 pushes to support this move, of course. And the queen is attacked, so you know it's developing with tempo. But what would have happened if you played knight takes d5 instead? E takes d5 gains a tempo on the knight. Knight e7 is best, and now bishop g5 is annoying for black, and playing f6 is of course too weakening for the king's side. So bishop g4, now f3 from Carlsen, a slightly controversial move because it at least temporarily makes the g2 bishop bad, but Carlsen of course knows what he's doing. So bishop e6 again to challenge the knight, and he continued with c3, which is a good move. Often in these structures white has to choose between playing c3 or c4. c4 attacks the advanced black pawns, which is good, but it also weakens the d4 square, which the knight here on c6 would be very happy to swing down into. So Carlsen chooses the less aggressive and more positional line, which is more or less his style. Another of the merits of moving the c-pawn is that it allows for knight c2, which brings this oddly posted knight on a3 back into the game, and it can later swing to e3 and support this outpost at d5. And naturally it's far better for white to have a piece occupying this d5 square rather than a pawn. It's a lot more effective. Nakamura now continued on the king side with h4, and we have an interesting scenario already with black advancing pawns to create pressure on both wings whilst white is playing in the center. The moves f3 and c3 are good positional ones that restrict the black pieces. So Carlsen now played knight c2, aiming for knight e3 next with the aforementioned strengths, and prompting Naka to trade before the knight gets there with bishop takes d5. And after e takes d5, best for black is knight a5. The knight can go to c4 at some point, or it can reroute via b7. So black has exchanged off the strong white piece here on d5, which he can be happy about, but he's handed white the bishop pair in the meantime, and he will have to take care on the light squares as a result. Carlsen continued logically with f4, unleashing his bishop once more and putting some pressure on the black center. Naka in turn played knight f5 to increase the pressure on g3. Playing instead h takes g3 doesn't achieve much, and on the contrary takes most of the pressure off white after h takes g3, rook takes h1, bishop takes h1. You know, white can aim to castle queenside later if he's concerned about the weaknesses on the king side, and meanwhile the exchanges have increased the strength and scope of his light squared bishop. So knight f5, now g4. Carlsen deals with the pressure by advancing the pawn and kicking the knight. It's best for black not to move the knight straight away and play instead h3, so he can move the knight to h4 after the bishop moves. And Carlsen moved it to e4, again with tempo because it attacks the knight. Playing instead g takes f5 is a blunder after h takes g2, forcing rook b1, and now queen h4 check. King e2, queen takes h2 gives white some serious problems to solve and a big advantage to black. So bishop e4, and now knight h4 from Nakamura. It's tempting to play queen h4 check instead, but this takes the h4 square away from the knight, and white has nothing to fear after king f1. For example, knight h6 attacking g4, and now rook g1, and black has nothing here, and on the contrary white is building up an edge. So knight h4, and now Carlsen castled, which, you know, a club player might have feared castling like this against Naka after having pushed both the G and the F pawns, but Carlsen has correctly assessed that he has a solid positional control here and there's no way for black to create any attacking chances. Naka continued with G6, aiming to fianchetto. He doesn't have to worry anymore about this D6 pawn. It's no longer backward on an open file. Often in the Sicilian, black will park his bishop on E7 for a passive defensive role of this pawn on D6, at least for the early middle game. Carlsen now played King H1, and he's planning to push his kingside pawns in order to generate initiative, and he doesn't want any rook G8s coming with check. For now he has solid control of the center, and it would be unwise for black to try and challenge it with something like F5, because it's just too weakening on the light squares. Naka played bishop G7, which means he can capture on E5 with the bishop should Carlsen trade, and bring more pressure to bear on the white king. Of course he doesn't want to allow this, and Carlsen's next move, F5, ensures that this bishop on G7 will remain locked in behind its own pawns and pretty inactive. Naka traded with G takes F5, which he's virtually forced to do. Something else like castling leads to problems after Queen E1 and tactical threats on this knight. Also Queen D3 is good. So G takes F5, G takes F5, and now Nakamura played Knight G2, perhaps aiming for a later Bishop H6, after which he can hope to plant a piece on this F4 outpost. But this move is something of a tactical blunder. If you want to try and spot why, then stop the video now. F6 is the move. Very nice from Carlsen. And note how he's managed to open up the king side here, especially on the light squares, giving his bishop some great attacking potential. There's no bishop takes F6. We'll get to why that is in a moment. First I want to show why bishop takes G2 is a blunder. Okay, white wins a pawn after H takes G2, but he's in trouble after king takes G2, Queen H4, threatening a big attack and forcing rook H1. But now comes Queen E4 check, and it's white who's weak on the light squares now after king F2. If instead Queen F3, then queen takes C2 check. So king F2, now queen takes F5 check, king E1, king G1 is the only other move, after which black gets winning initiative after rook G8. So now queen E4 check, also attacking the rook here on H1 and forcing king F2 because it has to be defended, and black can follow up with bishop H6, and it's very unwise for white to play bishop takes H6 and activate the rook. Black can play knight C4 next with a continuing sustained attack, so naturally Carlsen avoided this line altogether. So after F6, Nakamura played bishop F8, is virtually forced. Playing instead bishop takes F6 is losing after queen F3, attacking the bishop a second time. It can't move, or queen takes F7 is mate. And black is forced to counter with something like rook H4, so that this bishop is hanging. If white captures on F6 and black trades, it'll be hanging at the end of the combination. But now white has bishop G5, which is winning the exchange. Again, the bishop can't move, or its mate, the rook is attacked, and the bishop's attacked a second time, so, or a third time, sorry. So knight F4 is forced. Now bishop takes H4, bishop takes H4, with a promising position for white, the exchange up. Instead of bishop F8, bishop H6 is not a viable alternative, as white has queen H5, pinning this bishop, or the rook is dropping, and I think it has to be losing a piece. The best play continues knight F4, bishop takes f4, e takes f4, rook takes f4, and white has all the play and a pawn to boot. Okay, that's the end of part 1.